So I think that um, is everyone. So we will get going. David, thank you for joining us, and thank you everyone for. There's Jack saying it's the first time on. Brilliant. Evening, Jack. Welcome. So for those people like Jack, who's first tasting, this is like Ali's there. What we're going to do is we're going to go through the lineup. Myself and David were just discussing the lineup beforehand. We're going to go in a bit of a left of field order. So I'm going to say it out now, and then once David's introduced himself, I'll also type it into the chat so we all have that as a touchstone. So we're going to go 12, 18, cast strength, 15, and 21. Is that right, David?
You got that? Yep,
Perfect.
absolutely.
So the one last thing before I hand it over to you, David, is that everyone, we're going to be giving the discount out at the end for the 15% off these drams. And for those of you who are joining us, again, repeat myself for the first time, we want to hear your taste notes, your comments. We do want this to be as interactive as possible, so please keep them coming. And from kind of this point out, my job is more to kind of vocalize and navigate through what you have to say, because there's 130 of these packs went out, so just makes it a bit easier that way. So David, would you like to introduce yourself? I know you've been on, this is your third time joining us in Digital Drams, but for those people who it's the first time, do you want to introduce yourself?
Certainly do. Luke, thank you so much for having me back. So my name is David Miles. I work for Edrington UK. So I've got the somewhat glorious and ridiculous job title of Senior Whisky Specialist or Senior Whiskies Ambassador. I change it every time I get a new business card. But the joy of my job, of my life, is I get to talk about, educate, advocate, enthuse about all the whiskies in the Edrington and the Beam Suntory portfolios. So tonight is all about Highland Park, and I do love Highland Park, but I am an equal opportunities drinker as well. I'm delighted you're all here. Let us drink, let us talk about everything to do with Highland Park, but there are plenty of other whiskies out there too. So, whiskey is a joy because there is just such a range of possibilities that it gives you so many opportunities, and Highland Park is one of those distilleries that really is so well regarded, Luke. I think it's so well loved by so many whiskey drinkers and aficionados, and it's also such a great single malt whiskey to introduce people to the joy of single malt whiskies too. So it's got this wonderful role to play. Now, some of you I've seen before and have been on some of the sessions I've done. For the people this is their first time, welcome. And so pleased you could join us. I'm absolutely delighted, actually, because people who've been on my sessions before, we've tasted different whiskies, but I hate to have to admit it, the jokes will be the same. And for the newbies, hey, you might have heard my jokes before, so maybe I can get away with it.
No, it's excellent, and we were talking about before we came on there about sort of firsts and repeating things and everything. But I do think this has got to be probably the world's most popular, and the first time we've had it featured on the W Club, Norwegian whiskey. So it's great to have it on. It really is.
It's on no.
On the other side, yeah.
It's on that sleeve, but no, you do. If you look very closely, and my lighting's too bad, I am wearing my Highland Park top, but that is actually it's an Orcadian flag because it is it's trimmed in yellow around the blue cross rather than in white. So Orcadian rather than Norwegian, but a beautiful cue to kick off there. Because one of the joys of Highland Park is this wonderful introduction to single malt Scotch whisky, from one of the least Scottish places in Scotland, from one of the least Scottish cultures in Scotland. So for anyone who's not sure, and there's Luke with that beautiful map of Scotland behind him there.
Here's one I made earlier.
Head up to Scotland, keep heading north, keep going north, you keep going north and north, you get right to the top, and in fact just where Luke's map runs out, You fall
Yeah,
over the
it's
top.
actually up. It's actually up off the screen somewhere. But
It is. It's kind of like where it says map on the distillery map of Scotland. You head up to John O'Groats, fall over into the Pentland Firth, swim for about not that far, 7 or 8 miles, but please do not try that because you will not survive. It's one of the most treacherous stretches of water in the world there. And actually, we'll get on to why that's important, because it's important for more reasons than just keeping us away from swimming there. Swim for about 8 miles and you reach the Orkney Islands. But because they are this archipelago of islands off away from the mainland, they were not Scottish for a long, long part of their history. They were part of the greater Viking Empire. They were, that's where the Norsemen, the Vikings, had their longboats based when they were going out, pillaging, looting, stealing and robbing. To this day, there's a lot of Orcadians, their surnames are still Magnussons and Ewansons and Sigurdssons. There are not so many MacDonalds and Macduffs and McGregors there. The culture's different. The guy who founded Highland Park back in 1798, Magnus Ewanson. So everything about the culture, the history, the heritage of the Orkney Islands is very different. And recently, but this has been very much reflected in the whiskey and in the bottles in particular. It's not actually on the labels of the bottles that we've got here, but anyone who's got a bottle to hand, and excuse me, I go to reach for my prop.
I think I did have one here. I should have thought of that, bringing it out. But oh, there you go.
Yeah, but yeah, something. And because I've got a screen up, it's not going to. There you go. A Highland Park 12-year-old. You can see like the etching, the glasswork. It's all redolent of it. It's all based on what the Vikings left in the Orkney Islands, and this is Viking honor, and we have a Viking pride and a Viking scars, and we've been playing up the Viking history and heritage an awful lot. Ladies, gentlemen, you will be amongst the first to know tonight. We're not denying it in any way, but we are going to be stepping back from that emphasis on the Scandinavian, the Viking history and heritage. We are going to be focusing more on the whiskey and focusing more on the Orkney Islands and what they do contribute to the whiskey in a very, very real way. Luke, I feel like I've been talking for quite a long time already, and no one's got a whiskey yet. So
well, that's what I was literally about to say. I mean, yeah.
This is on me. Can I suggest that everyone reaches into their rather beautiful little packs, gets the 12-year-old. I understand that somebody managed to get 2 15-year-olds and not a 12, and all I can say is lucky for you. Not because the 12 is not wonderful, but the 12 is gorgeous. So let us have.
And you were also saying before we started, David, that if you have the glassware available, that it's worth keeping a bit of this as a benchmark and returning to it.
Absolutely.
Just to see how we progress through.
I am bitter, mean, and twisted at heart, whereas Luke is a wonderful, kind, generous, warm-hearted soul. And he's sent you out 5 samples here, including a cask strength sample. So my suggestion, and as with all of my suggestions, do feel free to ignore me. My suggestion is we've got the 12. Let's have a smell. Let's have a little taste of it. But we're going to use that as our benchmark. So if you can avoid drinking it all at once, we'll keep coming back, and when we nose and taste the other whiskies, come back to the 12, because this is what Highland Park's reputation is built on. But it's really interesting, I think, to be able to compare with the other expressions, the older expressions, the different strengths of the expressions, to see what we come back to. Now, as we've gone in with the 12 here, so Highland Park is fundamentally all about sherry cask maturation. A couple of the whiskies we're going to taste tonight do have a little bit of bourbon barrel influence, but what is dominant is sherry cask. And I think as you smell and nose this, smell, nose it, and please have a taste if you haven't already. That glorious, the dried fruits, like, slightly cakey notes are there. It's a gentle spice lilt almost. You get the little bit of the cut through coming there from the spices. Lingers nicely on the palate. Yeah. Highland Park 12 is wonderful. Highland Park 12 is, one of those whisky. What Highland Park 12 gives me, I always find, is if I go to a bar, it's got a really great whiskey selection, and I can't make up my mind, and it's busy, and the bartender's looking at me, and sort of, come on, there's a lot of people behind you. Come on, make your mind up here. Highland Park 12, because then I've got a dram I know I'm going to enjoy. It's going to taste great, and I can then take my time, maybe thinking about what else. And I know it's never going to let me down. Highland Park 12, it's so reliable. It's just, and I'm a spoiled brat. I get to taste all of these wonderful things. I come back to Highland Park 12, and it's like, damn, that's such a good whiskey. It really, really is.
We've already got some great comments in there. Reverend Kevin White says, "Dare I mention Christmas cake in March?" Gary agrees with the Christmas cake influence. I actually got something from this I've never gotten from Highland Park before, but I don't know if any of you have Barn Brack, which is like a fruit loaf that normally you eat in Ireland around October, November, and it's maybe not quite as sweet or as fruit, it's slightly more bready than a Christmas cake, but there's something of that in there because there is that kind of maltiness and that kind of breadiness along with the kind of fruity flavors. It's quite interesting. Scott said it's a wee winter warmer. I mean, like I know it's March, Tim, but we've only just the start of March. I mean, it still feels like winter here in Scotland. So
certainly, here in London, the temperature's dropped. We've gone into March, and it's now like 10 degrees colder than it was in February. So a winter warmer is just what we're looking for here.
We'd also like to give a welcome there to Mark, who's from Cologne. I must say I love a good crisp colch, but is currently in a hotel room in Glasgow. So welcome.
Now we've jumped onto the 12. There's something I just want to say. So let's keep thinking about this because it's such an integral and important part of the Highland Park character. So we are a partially peated whiskey. We have our own floor maltings at the distillery. We still use them. We only have the capacity, and in fact, we only want to peat a certain amount of all the barley that we use. But the barley that we do that is peated that goes into Highland Park is all peated by us. The barley that comes in from outside comes from Simpsons. We have a very close relationship. You talk to Marie, the distillery manager. She's talking to her contacts at Simpsons 3 times a week to find out what's going on, where it's coming from, what the quality is. I mean, when I say where it's coming from, we know exactly which farms it's coming from. We're getting closer and closer these days to actually knowing which fields it's coming from, and you start talking to a distillery manager about this sort of thing, and like her passion for knowing this, because it has such an influence on the starch content and therefore the sugar content. But the barley we're peating ourselves is all peated with Orcadian peat. We dig our peat at 5-6 miles away from the distillery, a place called Hobbister Moor. And why this is so important, so integral to the Highland Park character, and this comes back to where the Orkney Islands are and that treacherous stretch of water. One of the reasons that is so treacherous, off the North Scotland here, you basically have 2 big weather systems that sort of collide. You've got the freezing cold from the Arctic coming down one way, and you've got the warmth of the South Atlantic drift coming up the other way. And that South Atlantic drift, the reason why I always feel bizarrely, but not bizarrely, on the west coast of Scotland, you have almost tropical gardens and these palm trees and things growing despite the weather there. There's a warmth that comes up. But these two weather systems collide. And what this means is that the weather in Orkney is pretty constant all year round. It rains the whole time. Snow is a rarity in the Orkney Islands, and the rain doesn't come down, it comes across, because the wind will be blowing at 30, 40 miles an hour fairly constantly. You go out to Yesna Bay, which is where some of the cliffs in Orkney are, they've recorded wind speeds there up to around 130 miles an hour. And the reason I'm talking about the weather is not just because I'm English and that's what we talk about, the weather. It's because what this weather means, you've got winds blowing 30, 40 miles an hour the whole time and loads of rain. You've actually got very fertile soil, but nothing can grow tall because the winds are blowing. It just does not happen. Fundamentally, there's no trees in Orkney. There are some trees in the Orkney Islands, but they are sad, sorry looking saplings, which are basically dreaming of growing up to be a tree one day. Nothing grows tall. Really, the only thing that grows with any vigor in the Orkney Islands is heather. And that's important because peat is decomposed vegetation. The peat that we dig from Hobberston Moor is made up of the vegetation on the Orkney Islands. It's just heather. Now, peat from Islay, for instance, Islay peat is going to have a lot more, and because the peat bogs where the peat is dug in Islay for Islay whiskies tends to be much closer to right on the seafront there. So there'll be far more seagrass, even like seaweeds. It's going to have a different quality to it. Mainland peat in Scotland, a few thousand years ago, Scotland was covered by the Caledonian forest. So mainland peat is going to be much woodier in its quality. So the peat, as you burn it, what that vegetation, what that raw material was, is going to have a big influence on the aroma, the flavor of the smoke. Orcadian peat is different to peat anywhere else in Scotland. We are the only distillery that uses Orcadian peat as part of the peating process. We do it all ourselves at the distillery. That delicate, gentle, but still noticeable smoke note in Highland Park is different from the peatiness in any other Scotch whisky, because we're the only distillery that uses Orcadian peat.
No, that's fascinating, and that answers Christian's question about where does the peat come from, and no, that really is fascinating. They just kind of, I suppose it's slightly related in terms of what you were talking about with the weather and stuff at the start, because Peter's asked, he's a newbie and he wants to know, which is not a silly question at all. I think it's a question that most people who drink a lot of whiskey don't stop to think and ask enough. Is I suppose, to sum it up, is about consistency of release, given all the environmental factors you've just pointed out to there, and different things that we experience within the climate and that. How do you achieve consistency of your 12-year-old bottling every year?
So the advantage, there are so many different variables, and it's actually such a good question. So okay, so hopefully here's a few things that maybe some people, all of us, haven't considered quite so much. So when you're peating your barley at the distillery, you've got your kiln lit, you're burning the peat, the smoke is rising up through the perforated floor, through all your barley, and you've got those beautiful pagoda roofs with the shutters there, and these chimneys are drawing the smoke, the peat smoke up through. Now, on days when the wind is really blowing, that pulls the smoke through so quickly, you get over the same length of time, you get a very different degree of peatiness compared to when it is much milder, much calmer. And we do have milder, calmer days when the smoke will linger much more. So at the distillery, it's almost there's a choice of, if the smoke is being pulled through really quickly, we need to allow longer for the peating process to get the same level of peatiness in that barley. Or maybe that's not possible because we are time constrained and we need to keep things moving here. We accept that we're going to have a batch of barley that is going to have slightly less peatiness to it than our norm, than our median is. But conversely, there will be some batches which are going to be smokier because the weather has been calmer, the smoke has sat in the peat for longer. So we will get a variation in the smokiness of the barley here. Now, I was lucky enough, I was up at the distillery in January, and for many years when I've been talking about Highland Park, I've said, we peat a certain percentage of the barley that we use. And Marie, the distillery manager, was like, I wish you'd all stop saying that. It's not about that. Stop it. So, okay, so that's why I just used a certain figure. What we're looking for is to achieve a certain smokiness in the new make spirit. If that means that to achieve that, we have to use slightly more or slightly less of the barley that we've peated ourselves, and we need to then, be measuring how peaty that barley is, we're going to change the ratio of our barley to make sure that our new make spirit is consistent. So it's not about how much barley is smoked or is peated. It's about, did we get the consistency right in the new make spirit?
No, that's interesting. And then I mean, there's a lot more I could ask about that, but I know a couple of people have said it's becoming very difficult if you're supposed to save a bit of the 12 to benchmark to not finish the glass. So
yeah, thank God they are keeping us on track here, Luke. So everyone, please, the 18-year-old. So the reason there is a method to my madness, the cask makeup of the 18 and the 12 it's not identical, but it's very similar. It is all about sherry cask. There is no bourbon barrel influence here. The 18-year-old has a little more first fill cask influence. So we're going to get a little more of the flavor, of that is there in the oak coming through. It's, when you taste it, you might not notice quite so much of that smoke. The smoke is delicate in the 12 anyway. The 18, you've got to look, you've got to, search for it a little bit.
You wouldn't even think until right in the finish, you wouldn't almost even think there was any kind of peat.
It's still there, but because there's a lot of other flavor coming out, it's hidden a little bit. Now, I'm seeing some of the comments coming up about the 18. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I totally agree with you. The 18 is great, as Christian has just said. We talk about sherry casks and bourbon casks in whiskey a lot, and it's not wrong because these are the different seasonings that the different casks have had. But probably what is more important, and so let's play with this for a little bit now. The most important thing isn't what your casks have been seasoned with. The most important thing is the subspecies of oak that has been used. So those bourbon barrels that we're not really going to be talking about much tonight are made from American oak, white oak, Quercus alba. But a lot of American oak is actually used in sherry casks. And so American oak, not bourbon barrel, American oak as timber gets shipped to Jerez in the south of Spain, allowed to dry in Spanish sunshine, cut down into staves, made into casks, seasoned with Oloroso sherry, 18 months to 2 years or so. Sherry gets dumped, casks get shipped up to Scotland, all the way up to Orkney, and we don't break sherry casks down. So fundamentally, every time we're shipping a cask up to Orkney, we are importing 500 litres of Spanish air, which is a really ridiculous thing to do. But a lot of sherry casks are also made from European oak. Quercus robur, Quercus petraea. Now, American oak gives you a lot of vanilla. American oak gives you fresher citrus notes. It gives you hints of tropical fruit. European oak tends to be where the dried fruit notes come from, the richer spice notes come from, all those cakey notes that we're looking at there. The next most important thing is probably the degree of burn that's been applied to a cask. So bourbon barrels by law must be charred on the inside. You get a heavy degree of burn. If you char that oak, you're going to caramelize those wood sugars that are there in the oak. So that's going to give you that more intense caramel sweetness. Sherry casks get toasted. So the toasted quality is it's still a char, it's still a burn, but it's a lighter degree of burn applied to the wood, because sherry has a lower ABV than bourbon going into the cask, so you don't want too much burn. But the lighter degree of burn is going to influence the flavors that are there in the oak. The cask size is going to be really important, and it does matter, but probably in that order: species of oak, degree of burn, cask size, what the oak was seasoned with. So although what we're comparing, what we're drinking at the moment is all sherry cask matured, American oak sherry casks give you very different flavor to European oak sherry casks. And the different balance, the ratio you use between those different types of wood, even though they're all sherry seasoned, is another way to get a different quality, a different flavor in your different expressions. So the Highland Park 18 is all sherry casks like the 12, but they have a higher proportion of European oak casks and a higher proportion of first fill casks. So I think with the 18, and I don't know, Luke, maybe you can see some of the comments in the chat, but it is you get a bit more. I find it's almost slightly drier because you get a bit more of the wood. You get some of those darker notes, the dark chocolate coming through a little bit.
Definitely chocolate is, yeah. Maybe even a hint of coffee. Yeah, we've got some great comments coming in there. Reverend Kim Wright said that's a beautifully delicate nose, mellow on the tongue and subtle, but it's detectable smoke lingering afterwards. Detectable, I meant to say.
How much did you?
This is only on my second whiskey. I mean, Jesus. Adam has said, what's the damage on the 18? It's £115 normally, but you'll be getting 50% off tonight. Gary says, hope the 12 is good, but this is different level. It's a really absolutely gorgeous whiskey. I mean, our website calls it one of the most awarded whiskies of all time, and I can totally see why. So keep the tasting notes coming and the questions coming. I'm just going to double back on a couple from earlier that we never got to. One was from Kirsty, was asking, you were talking earlier on, David, about the traceability of grains and where it came from, which almost ties in with what you're saying about the casks there and traceability of where they come from, because I mean, I suppose cask management of the last 30 years within Scotch and Irish whiskey is just a different level from back in the day when they'd used whatever was lying about. But Kirsty said, is there any plans to move to like a Kilcoman Octomore type of kind of real grain to glass traceability?
So we are going to move as close, more and more to absolute traceability, keeping the root there. Although we are still quite a small distillery in the greater scheme of things, we certainly couldn't do the farm to bottle journey that somebody like Kilcoman does. We just make too much whiskey. We need to so we need to buy the barley in, but we do know which farms we get it from. As the technology gets better and better and more usable, we will know which fields it comes from, and what time of the year, to which day almost it was harvested, and because if you know that sort of figure in advance, you'll be able to make more accurate forecasts about the sugar content, so about the amount of potential alcohol you're going to get from barley from different fields. and it's never going to be less, because you can have it all worked out, and then next year the strain of barley that you use is going to change up, and that's going to influence the yield and the sugar content, the starch content there. So, but we are the whole element of sustainability, of openness, traceability is a very, very important part of everything that we're doing. Actually, as I've just brought sustainability up there, and because I've got my notebook open just on the side here from where I was scribbling notes as I was walking around the distillery. This I thought was really rather brilliant. At the moment, so Highland Park at the moment, we dig our peat on Hobberston Moor. So a few years, even let's say 10 years or so ago, we used to dig about 250 tons of peat a year, which in the greater scheme of things is not a huge amount, but it's 250 tons. At the moment, we dig 80 tons of peat to get the same, to get more barley peated at the distillery. We just are so much more effective, efficient at using the peat that we dig. So the figure they look at, the forecasts of how long is Hobberston Moor going to last for, we're good for 400 years or so. But there's also the Marie, the distillery manager, like Pete, you talk about the vegetation, like what's gone into it. That's not what's important. Just told you it's all about the heather because it's important. She's like, no, that's not what's important. What's important? It's all about the moss. It's the sphagnum moss, because it's the moss that is the catalyst for a peat bog forming. It's the moss that actually helps everything to break down. And quite seriously, she said whenever she's out there on Hobberston Moor, she picks up some of the moss. She just picks it and she walks to another part of the moor and she just sort of drops it down there. And she was actually actively encouraging us to do this, to spread the moss around, because this is actually what will accelerate the production of peat there. And it's like, you're just taking handfuls. This can't make a difference. She's like, it will matter. Do it. And so we're digging down into hands of moss and spreading it around. Kind of gloriously, you take the sphagnum moss as it goes, it's in the water and it starts to spread out in the water, and this starts decomposing, encouraging all the other elements, the other vegetation, the heather, to decompose there. But as the sphagnum moss starts to spread out, it starts to look a little different. It starts to look like something. And please forgive me, ladies and gentlemen, because what it looks like and what it is known as, it's drowned kittens. It's like drowned kittens on a peat bog. And what we want is more drowned kittens, because that is gonna keep our peat bogs going. The other thing with Hobberston Moor, it is an RSPB reserve. So the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds are in control of it. If we were not being as sustainable as possible, we wouldn't be digging there. Mm-hmm. So, sustainability in peat really matters.
That's fantastic. I mean, I think that answers kind of, because Ian asked a question about sustainability in peat that I was hoping to come back to, and so that answers that. So that's absolutely perfect. We've got some other great comments coming in there, David, about this. I think it was James said that this could do with being a small bit stronger in the ABV. I can see what he means. It's a tremendous dram, but you do wonder what more you could eke out of it if it was maybe 46 or 48 or even cask strength. But yeah.
Did you just say cask strength there, Luke?
I might have. I mean, are you trying to use this as a segue to move on to the cask strength? Is it?
Are there any more? Is there anything else? Any more questions?
There's some great comments, but I don't think. Well, actually, maybe while we pour it, and as you start to nose the cask strength, we could, as in everyone does, we could talk about Ivan's question there about the difference between the old and new bottling of the 18.
Yeah. So there has been. The 18 does remain pretty consistent. Actually, to go back to that question about how do we maintain consistency in the 12, consistency in the 12 is actually pretty easy, because whenever we put a batch of 12-year-old together, it's going to be a few hundred casks. And so that gives us enough, minor variation between all those casks that by doing a judicious selection, you maintain consistency there. The 18, although we do a number of batches, it's always going to be a much smaller amount. So they've started to put a date on the 18 to say it was the 2020 release or 2022 release, whatever, which it's a little bit of a get out in case there is a little variation, because there are so many fewer casks that go into the 18, we maybe can't always guarantee that it will taste exactly the same. It will be within the parameters of what we want our 18-year-old to taste like, but it just allows us to say, you know what, because we're only using 40, 50 casks in a batch, we couldn't get it exactly the same as the last batch. When you get to go to an extreme, the 54-year-old that we're just releasing at the moment is 2 casks. So even if we were to do another 54-year-old, which we won't, but if we were, it would never taste the same, because we'd never have 2 casks that were just the same. Even the 25-year-old, let alone every time we do a 25-year-old, it is only maybe 20 casks if we're lucky. That's all we have. And the 20 casks we have available in 2022 would have been very different from the 20 casks we had available in 2019. We have an idea, a parameter of what we would like our whiskey to taste like if we're going to release a 25-year-old. But one of the reasons we put a release date or which batch it is because it cannot be the same when you've only got so few casks there. So that's one reason why the 18 is going to keep changing. Now, the other reason, and it depends on how far back you want to go here with the 18. I believe, I've been told this, it must be true, who would lie to me and why would I lie to you? But I believe one of the reasons that, you go back 15 years or so, that Highland Park 18 was so magnificent was, back then, we had a lot of very old whiskey that was sitting around not doing anything, and we were not doing any 30 and 40-year-old releases. So Highland Park 18, 15, 20 years ago, would have actually had quite a lot of 25, 28, 30-year-old whiskey going into it. So the Highland Park 18 would have been really magnificent. All the comments we've seen, it is still a magnificent whiskey. But we are now making more, we are doing 21-year-old and 25-year-old and 30 and 40-year-old whiskies. So Billy Walker, whiskey maker for Glendronach, and makes some wonderful one. That thing he said recently, the goal is not consistency, the goal is excellence. That's a brilliant thing to keep in your mind when you're thinking about whiskey. Our 18-year-old is never going to taste always exactly the same. I will have talked about consistency. I want to tell you that we're going to achieve consistency. It's always going to be the same. It's not, but as long as we're achieving excellence, that's what the goal is.
No, yeah, well put. Which I suppose, to finish up on the 18, Adam's asked, is there only one batch of it a year or so?
No, for the 18, we will do a couple of batches a year, at least. And it's going to depend on demand and forecasting. So, Adam, if Luke lets us know that he needs another 200 pallets of 18-year-old, we're going to sort of gulp, swallow and say, not sure we can do that. But if he gives us do we have the whiskey available to make it? If he's like, we don't want any of your 18-year-old this year, we won't do that batch. So it's a combination of, do we have the casks, married to, is there demand for the 18-year-old out there? Now, your comments on this 18-year-old, there's generally a demand for the 18-year-old. We don't have much trouble selling this. But the less romantic, but actually incredibly important side of whiskey making, which is forecasting and stock management. And if we use that now, does that mean we won't have casks available for, you know, a 21-year-old in 2 years' time? And if we don't do that, does that mean these are the more practical and less romantic sides of whiskey making, but they are incredibly important.
Hmm. Yeah. No, that kind of, I mean, we were talking to some distilleries recently, and there's literally like 40, 60, 80-year plans as to how much volume liquid you'll need in certain percentage casks by then. So the scale is huge when you think about some other kind of even like a craft brewery or whatever, how you try and manage your output. No, it's great. So do you want to tell us a bit more about this cask strength? I mean, I've
The
been
cask strength, yes. So there's a couple of things about this. So one is the strength of this cask strength. You know, it says 64.1% ABV. That's one of the strongest cask strength scotches that I've ever come across. Now, there's a couple of reasons for this. And the first reason is that, so I'm lucky enough, I've got a bottle of Highland Park new make here.
Oh, I thought it was like malt vinegar or something,
It's a little more interesting than that. So this is Highland Park new make, and this is paying off still 70.3%. So 70.3% ABV. I had a previous batch which was at 69.8. So Highland Park new makes comes off the still at around that 70% ABV. Most distilleries will have their new make at roughly that sort of strength, but they will add a bit of water before going into the cask. They'll bring it down to around 63% or so. It's less volatile, you get a little more spirit going into the casks, all sorts of good reasons for doing that. We don't. We put it into the cask at the strength it comes off the still. So, and again, one of the reasons we can do that, it's more volatile. One of the things we talk about with Highland Park is this idea of cool maturation. Because of all the warehouses actually on the Orkney Islands, our weather is pretty consistent all year round, so we don't have those warmer summer days with the oak expanding, the evaporation, the angel share really kicking in. So we can afford to take the chance of not cutting with water down to 60. It goes into the cask at 69, because that's for a Scotch whiskey. If it went in at 63, there is no way you could get as a cask strength whiskey a number of years later at 64.1. Mm-hmm. So we've probably lost about 5% of the alcohol. Now, there is no age statement on the cask strength. This is batch 3. Yes.
We've got some great comments in there. Just I don't have to interrupt your flow there, but I mean, like the feedback has been fantastic. David said it explodes in the mouth, a few drops of water, fine espresso coffee, a dark fruit cake, leading to lasting, subtle, smoky finish. This is a winner. Michelle Marcel reminds me of a tangine, fennel, preserved lemons, honey. Starts smoky, but ends so sweet. First time I have drunk this properly. One for a special occasion. There's some really great tasting notes in there. James has asked you to combine it with the 18 and send him a sample. So it's definitely going down a hit. Yeah. It is always the question we often get asked is how come brands don't do more cask strengths, David, when they're this phenomenal?
Because again, I hate to be like unromantic and practical here. The more cask strength we do, the less is available for 12s and 18s. That 18-year-old, which is also rather popular. Now, even at 43%, we have added a good slug of water to fundamentally take what would have been, let's say, the whiskey in the cask was down to about 60% ABV after 18 years of maturation, or maybe 55, somewhere in that figure. But because we're adding that amount of water to get it 43%, that means we get that much more whiskey going into a bottle. So on the one side, there would be far less whiskey for us all if we did more cask strength. The other side actually goes back to consistency. And in many ways, the whole point of cask strength, the fact that this is batch 3, we've done a 2 now, there have been 2 previous cask strengths, they're different. Because one of the joys of cask strength is you select casks that will demonstrate, will reflect a different aspect of the distillery character. But they will be, every batch will be different. So if everything we did was cask strength, actually, no one would quite know what it was you were producing. No one would know what to expect. Everything would be a bit too variable. So I'm delighted that we are putting out cask strength whiskey, because it brings out this sort of reaction that people, it's like a tagine with fennel and preserved lemons. Wow, what a tasting note! But it's got that sort of quality. The other side is that, with the best, for a lot of whiskey drinkers, cask strength is a bit scary. We couldn't do everything at cask strength.
For a lot of drinkers, 40% is scary. I think the majority of people that most of my friends and family just don't understand how you can, I can drink as much whiskey as I can, because it's just too much for them, So no, I can, as though it's a shame, because I love cask strength whiskey as much as anyone on this call. You can understand wine. Adam has asked how many bottles of the cask strength batch 3 we've got out there.
I don't know. It will be a few thousand, but I'm not prepared to be more. I'm guessing there anyway, but I'm not prepared to be more specific than that. We will do, a batch of casks that Gordon Motion thinks are right and good to go, and I've just added a little tiny bit of water to it. I went like the looshing, the cloud that was going on in it was like, wow, that was a little chemical explosion happening in there.
No, it is. I've done the same, and it definitely it changes. It becomes so much sweeter with a drop of water.
Yeah.
We also had a question about some. I just try and find it there. Someone had asked about, they tried a cask strength from a 13-year-old that was 66.5%. How's it possible? Does some show less angel share? But I suppose that is the case. It's there's no scientific. I mean, I'm sure there is scientific, but there's no way for you to control the angel share and how much evaporation every year. And in some climates, obviously maybe not in Orkney. You can correct me if I'm wrong here, David. The percentage of alcohol can increase depending on the humidity in the air and the atmospheric pressure.
Absolutely can, but basically you do need to be in somewhere like Kentucky in the USA,
Kentucky or India. But yeah.
In Scotland, the angel share will be alcohol evaporating faster than water. In Scotland, basically every cask you are losing strength over time.
Yeah.
In Kentucky, you can get whiskey that gets stronger. So bourbon regulations, you make going into the casks is a maximum strength of 62.5% ABV. I've got a bottle of Booker's bourbon there that is at 63.05. So that has increased in strength over a few years.
Yeah,
that is to do with
Junior from Buffalo,
with humidity. The warmth and the humidity that basically you don't get in Scotland. Now, but having said that, even in Scotland and in the Orkney Islands, we'll talk about the consistency here, but casks on the top floor of a warehouse, the top floor will be slightly warmer than the bottom floor of a warehouse. This will have a bit of an influence over, I'm sorry, whoever it was who said about a 13-year-old cask strength. Depending on where that had been in the warehouse, will have had some influence, a percentage point or so, on the final cask strength, on the evaporation that happened there. These are all, how well made the cask is. It doesn't need to be leaking, but if bit of if a little extra porousness, openness to the air for these things to be happening here, and a cask strength. We just talk about cask strength, but those casks that are butts and punches at 500 or a hogshead at 250 litre capacity, that is going to have a different amount of surface area to allow evaporation to happen. There's so many variables going on here.
And I suppose that this was one thing I set out to ask you tonight at some point, David, was just like very much related to what you're saying there. Where I'm from in the southwest of Ireland, there's a distillery near me that claims that the latitude of the distillery versus most distilleries in Ireland, but also in particularly in Scotland, means that it has a different kind of impact on maturation. Because atmospheric pressure and all this thing is obviously different as you get closer to the equator. And the obvious one for that would be, you guys up in Orkney in Highland Park, and I know people often say that like something like a Scapa tastes a lot different when it's older, because it takes a lot longer to mature, but it rounds off differently. How do you find that in terms of maturing these casks on Orkney?
Yeah, so I'm sure. Listen, it matters. It has an influence. As far as the maturation in the Orkney Islands, what is more important is that the weather, is the climate, and the fact that it is pretty constant the whole year round. So even if you're maturing your whiskey in Speyside, even in a Speyside summer, you will have warm days. You will be up to 25, 26, 27 degrees, and not forever and not all summer, but there is a warm summer. But winter will be cold. Winter will be below freezing. There will be snow everywhere. So in terms of what that's doing to the staves of the barrels that are all piled up behind me, in warm weather, that grain of the oak will expand, will open up, will allow the spirit, the whiskey, to soak into the wood, and the cold weather closes that grain down and squeezes the liquid back into the cask. Now in Orkney, the weather, those parameters of temperature are far more limited. Generally, even in winter, it's very rarely below freezing. It goes to about 3 or 4 degrees. Summer, it's very rarely above 20. It's very rarely above 16 or 17 degrees. So in terms of what that influence on how the oak is reacting, it's opening a little bit and closing, opening and it's closing. The advantage of this is that we can allow whiskey to mature for longer without the wood influence dominating, without the tannins really taking over here. So yeah, the latitude matters, but what really matters is that climate due to the weather.
I suppose the latitude is impacting the weather, in terms of those atmospheric changes. So the two are supposed to correlate in that sense.
Yeah.
But no, that's excellent. Thank you for that information, David. A couple more. We maybe start pouring the 15, because I'm just a wee bit conscious of time.
Absolutely. And please, maybe just if you have a little rinse of your mouth after that glorious cask strength.
Well, definitely. I mean, we a couple of questions while we're getting the 15 poured on that cask strength. Christian has said, is the cask strength all sherry casks?
Ooh, good question. Now, I believe it is, but I also believe that it's got quite a lot of American oak there, and there is no age statement, but we were only down to 64.1, so I would imagine that most part it's actually quite a young whiskey. And so therefore, I would imagine that Gordon Motion would have veered towards selecting a bit more, a few more American oak casks. not necessarily bourbon, but American oak, because those vanilla notes, the slightly sweeter notes, will be a bit more prevalent, will give you a slight softness. It would help balance, a possible harshness that would be there in a younger whiskey.
Gary's asked about, do you rotate casks at all, or are they just sedentary?
They are basically, no, they sit there fundamentally. We've probably got more casks of whiskey than there are Orcadians. We just don't have the manpower or the possibility. So some of we talk about rotating casks. I think some of the people think about this in two different ways. So we don't rotate casks from the bottom of a warehouse to the top of the warehouse, and vice versa, because it's just, we don't have the manpower. It's just
too thick, worth the squeeze.
Do it. And we don't rotate casks on their axis, because all casks have a weak spot, which is where the bung is. And so you need that to be at the top. If that was at the bottom, and you've got the pressure of 500 litres of whiskey pushing down on a bung that's now on the bottom of a cask, you really run the risk of the bung popping. So we don't rotate that way, and we don't rotate bottom to top and top to bottom. We just let it sit there and do its thing.
And obviously, the more casks are handled, and the more they're disgorged and recast and stuff, you do lose ABV as well a lot quicker, and that sort of thing. So it's inefficient in a number of ways, not just labor and effort and that. So tell us about this 15.
So the 15 now. So the reason we've done the tasting in this order is because when I was up at the distillery in January, this is the way that our guide did the tasting. And so I can take no credit for being original. So if you did like doing it in this order, thank you very much. But say thank you to John up at the distillery. It was the idea.
John.
12 and 18, far more commonalities in the casks that are there. Now, what he was saying was with this 15, which we only introduced, I'm going to say last year, but maybe it was 2021 it came out. He said, they say it's all sherry cask, but I swear to God, you smell that, you taste that, and you tell me there's not some bourbon barrel in it. So we come down from the cask strength. I hope your palates have reset a bit, but it's still at 44%. So we've got, that little extra kick coming through here.
A lot more kind of honeycomb.
So that sweetness is there, and slightly, sort of pineapple-y, a bit of, that little sort of, that, tropical fruit sweetness there.
It's an interesting one. David says, so glad to see the 15 back. Visited distillery years ago, was my favorite tasting I did. Sherbet lemon sweets on the nose, creamy smoky goodness in the mouth. Still my favorite tonight before tasting the 21. And Alex has asked the question I was going to ask. Is there a reason behind the 15-year-old ceramic bottle?
Right. Looking left to the right. I couldn't believe that they did this. They were a distillery or a company that has invested so much in sustainability, so much in carbon, achieving carbon zero, carbon neutral. And we put a whiskey into a bottle which has actually got "do not recycle" on the back of it. It was inspired by the idea that back in the 19th century. Illicit whiskey makers would have put whiskey into anything they had available, and quite often that would have been just old ceramic water casks and jugs. There is going to be a change, so we're keeping the 15-year-old. Adam, you're going to be very pleased to hear that. I hope the 15-year-old is still going to be a big part of the core range going forward. It is coming out of the ceramic bottle. So somebody's just said about it's going to become a collector's item or whatever. Yeah, it will. But so we are moving away from that.
I never liked it, not because of its aesthetic on its own, or I didn't even actually think about the sustainability issue, which is bad. But it was just I for completion, when you have a range, a core range together, you want them, they don't necessarily have to look the same, but it just looked so odd, you know.
Yeah,
Because like what you like Redbreast rebranded a few years back, and I thought it was genius because they changed the little robin on the front so that it's in different motions of flight as it's like goes along. So if
yeah,
you have the full collection, 12, 15, 21, the robin's taking off on your shelf, you know. So they were
that's
going for a
brilliant.
holistic approach, and the Highland Park has this whiskey bottle that just looked so different than the rest. Not necessarily bad in its aesthetic on its own, as I say, but just so different. Like,
Yeah. So it is. It was an interesting introduction to the range. Let us judge it by the whiskey that is in our glasses. The ceramic bottle is going to be faded out. I just flashed up. I'm not sure, Luke. Was there a question about when are the new bottles all happening or something?
yeah, I'm just looking for that myself. I mean, I suppose it doesn't. I mean, it doesn't really matter. I suppose you can answer that either way.
So. I think the iconography, the bottle's going to stay the same shape. The sort of
Yeah,
Viking
Christian
iconography
said
will be
when will the bottles
faded
come back?
out, and that probably won't be until 2024 at the earliest.
Hmm. Perfect. So for next year, um, there's some. Sorry, I had a great question there. I'm after losing it. This is when you enter the fourth whiskey. My keeping up the chat gets a bit worse. Gary said I'm not getting any sweetness from the 15. It tastes more tart. Least favorite so far. Michelle says needs a touch of water, but but brings out a caramel toffee sweetness. I agree with Gary. Without water, it's a little harsh or tart. James is getting very, very chewy texture onto the 15. It has more of a peaty note. I definitely agree with that, James. I think it's out of the all ones we tried. I think this is the one where the peat hits me the most. And
Yeah.
going back to the 12 again only enhances it. There was a fantastic question a second ago. Reverend Kevin White had said your price is extraordinarily good. This is about the cask strength. How do you do that? But I wasn't sure if he was asking you or me. Um, we said cask strength.
But we give it to Luke, so that, like he's just everything on that price is profit to Luke. There, it's
Well, if you're 20 pounds, this set was if you're a W Club member. I mean, for the five whiskies, that's exceptional value. I think, David, we can all agree, including postage. The Yeah, so I suppose that's unless someone's there was there. I will try and find. There was two questions from earlier on that I skipped because we didn't have time, but I would like to go back to. So I don't know, David, if there's any interesting facts you wanted to fill us in while I try and find those.
you keep on having a look. Listen, I am just flicking through my notes from when I was there visiting to see if I've got anything else that was of real interest.
You want to tell us about the 54-year-old? That was the one I was looking for. Kirsty asked earlier on, how have you tasted the 54-year-old and just how awesome is it? So that was one of the ones I had pegged to go back to. So do you want to tell, you were telling me before we came on about this exceptional experience you were at down by the docks in London. So
Yeah.
do you want to tell us
So
about the whiskey itself first and then maybe that?
right, I would so love to be able to tell you all about this quite remarkable 54-year-old whiskey that I tasted, but I haven't tasted it, I'm afraid. They've kept it away from the likes of me. The Highland Park 54-year-old is, I mean, it is a remarkable whiskey. I am quite sure it is just two casks. We only had, it is only 225 bottles from those two casks. It is, I think, 225, and I think only 8 bottles for the whole of the United Kingdom. It is, sorry, I'm pulling up some notes here on.
And the bottle itself is stunning as well.
The bottle is
Picking a
beautiful.
bottle,
It comes in a wooden case, and every wooden case is different.
it's like a pregnant tree. I think it's,
yeah, 225 bottles are available. It's because this is going to be our 225th anniversary this year, so that sort of made.
Stephen and Caroline's there saying the 54-year-old's great, especially with Coke.
There's always one, well, in this case, two, aren't there? There's always two. So
if you've I suppose if you've got enough money, you can do what you want with it, you know.
Yeah,
I used to always when I ran a whiskey bar, we had some very expensive whiskies there. People always be like, "Oh, how would you drink that?" And would it be sacrilege to put ice in this, or would it be terrible to put a ginger in this? And I'm like, "Listen, pal, if you're buying the whiskey off me, I don't care what you do with it afterwards. It's your money, it's your palate. Do it, do it."
absolutely. My version of that, and I spent a fair bit of time with Fred No, who is the whiskey maker for Jim Beam, and he is the great grandson of Jim Beam. He is Jim Beam, and so he's constantly asked, how should I drink my whiskey? And his response is always, drink your whiskey any damn way you want to drink your whiskey.
Yeah.
Now, admittedly, if you talk about Jim Beam rather than Highland Park 54-year-olds, the options are possibly a little wider there. But whiskey should be a pleasure, Luke, not a challenge. So please enjoy your whiskey. And if that's adding water, if that's adding ice, if the 12-year-old Highland Park 12, tall glass, lots of ice, top it with ginger ale. It's a glorious, refreshing highball serve. Make an old fashioned with these, with the 12, with the 18 even. It works. It's wonderful. You're not going to get a great drink if you don't use great ingredients.
Someone had mentioned an old fashioned with orange bitters for this whiskey a second ago. So that is definitely a good shout.
We've got one more whiskey to go, Luke, and I think we should. I've seen someone just said they've having to make their apologies. So let us reach for the 21-year-old.
Yes. There is probably a lot of people listening politely thinking, when will they get to the 21-year-olds? This is the only reason I came in.
So, see this, it's actually quite light in its color, especially at 46% ABV. There is some bourbon barrel going into this. That I am
incredibly like green apple orchard fruit nose. It's just just hits you in the face.
Yeah.
I suppose relative to the ones we've tasted so far. And just for while we're sipping that, just for anyone's interest, I just stuck a link to the 54-year-old in the chat, just so people can see the bottle the aesthetic of it is beautiful. It's definitely worth taking a look at.
Yeah, it really is. It's
No, this is really interesting. We'd love to get your taste notes in there. I don't know if you're just being quiet, David, or if I've lost you for a second. You didn't stop talking. You just went so dead radio silent.
Yeah, sorry about and I was just. It is.
No, that's all right. No, you don't have to say.
You
the
get
line had gone bad. This one is an interesting one, because even on the nose already, going back to our previous comment, you kind of think, ooh, 46%. It's already thinking, you think it maybe could have a bit more of a punch in it than you'd expect.
Yeah, I get that.
But then when you actually taste it, you don't
coffee get apple sweetness for me. It's I've tasted the 21 over the last few years, and when it was launched, and we've done a couple of different 21-year-olds, and this is on at 46%. And the way I've always slightly felt about it, you've got the 12 and the 18, and then the slightly older. This is the core range. This is the family. This is you love your family, and you fall in and out with your family, but they're your family. This is what Highland Park is. And the 21-year-old is like 21-year-old's that kind of like that slightly strange uncle who's moved to Australia, and it comes back every now and then for a big family occasion, and he's kind of like really entertaining, and he's really great fun, and then after a while you go back to your core family.
I mean, there's other metaphors that are quite similar that you could it's as Craig has said there, which I think is what I was poorly trying to articulate what I meant by our Cask conversation. On the nose, it feels like it's not gonna. I mean, loads of complex notes, but it doesn't feel like it's gonna have a punch. You taste it, and it does have that bite in a good way. Because he said it's the one out of all the tastings, the ones we've tried tonight, the one that differs so much from the palate to the nose, and I'd have to agree. It definitely is much more kind of tannic, There's a real kind of tartiness in a good way on the finish compared to this really kind of fruity nose. Ian's got a bit of seaweed on the nose, liquid Jamaican ginger cake. That's a good one, Craig. It definitely has that nice bit of spice. Wow, aromas of peach, stone fruits, dash of water. It's so gentle and drinkable, not the same level of sweetness. You certainly saved the best to last. No, it's a good one. In terms of batches, we were saying about the 18, and you were talking about the 25. How does this one kind of factor in that regard?
So with the 21-year-old,
The 21-year-old, yeah, yeah.
There will be variations. We're still trying for consistency. We are going to have fewer casks. There will be some variation on it, but I mean, honestly, it's been a while since I've actually seen the bottle in its packaging, so I'm not sure if we're actually saying it's a different.
Well, I mean,
Release.
the picture, I don't think I can find out for everyone. But the one on our website says 2019, but that's I'm sure that's not the one I'm trying. I think I don't know which exact year it is, but it's definitely a more recent year than that. But that would imply that I suppose it is. You are saying, and it specifies November as well. So I suppose it's they're.
Yeah, and you know what? Something like the 21, I would imagine that is something we will do a batch of.
Mhm.
I'm gonna say once a year, but actually we'll do a batch and then we'll wait until the forecasts and the demand says we need to do another batch. So it might, 2019, then not another one until 2021 or 20 whatever.
Yeah, Adam
It's
says
it's going to be a movable feast there.
yeah. Adam says or there is a 22 release, which I'd say this probably is because the bottles would have been sent in by you guys directly for this, David. So I think that's yeah, almost definitely it. Reverend Kevin White said, I've certainly got the apple and heather honey on the nose, but there's a really spicy pepper tartness on the tongue. Interesting. I couldn't agree more. They're great tasty nuts. So this one is 225 pounds. And the discount, which I'm just going to fire in there, for all the whiskies tonight, you get 15% off with WS16HP. So best to buy now while you've had a couple of whiskies. And yeah, that's that. So we'd love to hear. I mean, this is gorgeous. Like the finish on this is incredible. I can still taste it now while I'm talking. But I suppose I'm not saying we jump off straight away, but now's the time where everyone needs to give their order of preference as to what they enjoyed tonight. And any questions, even if it's a question that you already asked but I failed to miss. Or I missed, please do let us know. Michelle says, had the pleasure of a distillery trip to Highland Park, visit a few years ago. Was worth the weather and the journey. It's the best I've been to, worth every penny. Anyone that's not been to, that's great. I mean, it's definitely on the bucket list. When we met before Christmas, David, you said you might be able to get me up there. My dream trip. One of my best my best pal from uni is a professor at the University of Iceland now, and he's always been there since COVID. So we haven't really, until last year, it wasn't really practical to visit. And he's always like, get up there. And I didn't realize until 2008, there used to be a Shetland to Faroe ferry. So
Yeah,
as far as I'm aware, there is still now a mainland to Orkney, Orkney to Shetland service, and there is a Faroe to Iceland, but there's no longer the one in between, because that would be an incredible journey if you could drive to Iceland from Scotland.
yeah. You're planning the world's weirdest commute here, Luke. But yeah, it sounds great.
It would be an odd commute, but I mean it would be exceptional. I've always loved to see the Faroe Islands. The Brian Kerr, former Irish Republic of Ireland manager, managed them famously, and got them up world rankings. So they're
Yep.
one to visit. And
I'm old enough to remember them beating Austria in a game once.
I've always
Now,
wanted to see Cleopatra as well, of course. But the
comments about visiting the Orkney Islands as well. So yeah, if you get the chance, please visit the distillery. It's glorious. It's wonderful. Everything I've been saying about the weather, the consistency, it rains the whole time. It blows across. It does. I was there. I arrived on the 16th of January and there was snow everywhere. I just told you there's hardly ever snow. There was snow everywhere. And even the Orcadians were like, whoa. And they were like, it's all right, it'll have gone tomorrow. The snow was there for like 3 or 4 days. It didn't go. On our last day, it was so calm. The sea was like a mirror. it was, this is not the Orkney Islands. The sea was like a mirror, and our flight was still cancelled. We still couldn't get off the Orkney Islands. So, and please go to the distillery, because the whiskey's wonderful. The distillery's glorious. You'll get such a warm welcome. But go look at everything else there. They've got some of the most valuable, rare, the Neolithic history that's there in the Orkney Islands. Some of the first evidence we have of human habitation in Europe is in the Orkney Islands. Even more recently than that, the St Magnus Cathedral in Kirkwall is just amazing. The Orkney Islands deserve your time and your visit, and you will love them. You really will. And we do make quite good whiskey.
No, that's brilliant. Chris said it's the Italian chapel.
Yes,
I've never been, but it's quite famous. Roger said went to Orkney, amazing. Love the history and the feel of the place. Very interesting crossing. Absolutely agree that the Highland Park is one of the best distillery tours, worth the trip, says Ali. We've got some interesting. I love these tastings where the kind of the definitive winner is not super clear. Some people have gone for the 15, 18, 21. I think the cask strength, just without actually doing an official count through of them all, roughly, I think the cask strength has won it. The 15 and 18 are probably tied for second, and then I'd say the 21, followed by the 12. But I like Ali's comment that the 12 is, even though it was his last in his order of preference, it was like visiting an old friend, which is really well put.
yeah.
David said did NC 500, North Coast 500 a few years ago. Had a few days in Orkney. Visited the distillery, of course, and Sacra Bray, the Neolithic village. David has been talking about good standing stones too. For me, the best pound for pound range available. Pete says 21.18 cask strength, 12.15. And Ian's got a question here regarding the branding. How much of impact do you think the use of Norse symbolism has captivated new customers? It's drawn to a bottle of Dragon Legend. I was drawn to a bottle of Dragon Legend due to the branding, so got my vote.
So it worked there. So thank you for joining us because of that. Yeah. It's been a brilliant part of our progression in history. It's run its course. We're never going to deny that Viking part of Orcadian history and culture. The next few years, we're going to be looking at slightly different aspects of what makes the Orkney Islands and therefore what makes Highland Park the whiskey that it is. So
yeah, no, it's clearly obviously going to be identified with the brand for a while. But when you say in terms of moving away from it, do you mean like, so obviously Viking honor and that kind of thing is going to completely disappear off the bottle? Because you said the bottle aesthetically isn't going to change much.
No, so the bottle shape will stay the same, but the etching, the calligraphy, the pattern work on it, that I think will fade out. And I think, and I am not part of these conversations, but things like Viking honor, Viking pride, Viking scars, that will also go. So we will be back to it being Highland Park 12, Highland Park 18. We're just gonna we'll just be toning down the Viking nature of it all.
No, that's perfect. I mean, I suppose it is from when you started to now, between computer games and TV series and Norsemen, it's shifted. It's I suppose the density within popular culture has shifted. So you do need to keep yourselves fresh.
Yeah,
and good. Gary's actually said the branding's always put me off. That's why I have a little experience with the Highland Park whiskey. It's confusing. So I suppose that was actually something when we spoke before Christmas. You were saying that customers who aren't so familiar with Scotch was like, oh, you're a Scottish single malt, but you've got this Scandinavian identity. Do you know, there I can understand. Yeah. I mean, for most people on here, it would make sense given the history of the island and everything. Once you get past that, it's fascinating. But for a new consumer, it can be kind of confusing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it wasn't there 6 years ago. prior to that, we weren't playing that up on the bottles, and so it will keep changing. You've got to move to stay in the same place. So that's what we will be doing.
Yeah, no, certainly. There's some great comments still coming in there, folks. But there's a few people logging off, and I think we're just coming up on the hour and a half mark. So it's been an absolutely fantastic tasting, David. Thank you for coming on. And I have a feeling this won't be the last time this year we chat here, and then that's a good thing.
I do hope you'll have me back. It has been an absolute joy and a pleasure, as ever and always. You've all been wonderful. There have been a number of comments, all of your comments. Thank you so much for making it so interactive. Thank you to everyone on this who has made just damn sure that it was not a lecture, because that would have been terrible.
No, 100%. No, it's really been fantastic. So that W code, that discount code is WS16HP. And we will hopefully have another tasting on sale for you next week, all going to plan. That's probably going to be with the Waterford distillery. So James, you'll be delighted. And so thank you everyone for joining. If there's anything, there was some fantastic comments tonight. Unfortunately, we couldn't get to literally every single one of them, but if there is one that you wanted answered that we couldn't, just email it back to the link you got the Zoom link from, and I'll pass it on to David, and we'll get it answered for you. The discount code will be valid for the next 2 weeks. So thank you for joining us for Digital Drams. Thank you again, David. Please do make the most of that discount code while it's valid. I don't think it will happen, but should any sell out, they will be back in before the discount code is out. So keep an eye. If you decide to use the code in the morning and miss out, that's more for people who are watching this on the recording in a couple of days than you guys live. It should be fine tonight. So that bit out of the way. So thanks again, David, and thank you for everyone for joining us. If this was your first time, please join us again, and we'll talk to you all soon. See you, David.
Thank you very much indeed, everybody. Bye.
Thanks again, everyone. We'll talk to you later.